Well, a very warm welcome to everybody watching as participants, either virtually and remotely, or preparing to attend the conference at Sheffield, the International Association of Chaplains in Higher Education 2022 conference called Liberty, Legacy and Leadership. And I'm thrilled that our first keynote speaker, Professor Adam Dinham, is with us on this film, so that we can hear some of his thoughts and insights that will be so relevant throughout the conference, and as a resource for the future for us to come back to as we're thinking about belief, no belief, and religion and its place in the university, and the responsibility that chaplaincies and other leaders and managers have in thinking about the intersection between that area and other areas of equalities, and how the life of a chaplaincy can have such an impact on the students and staff of their institutions. So let me now get straight on with introducing Professor Dinham, and some of the things that it's worth pointing out about Adam is that he's not only the Professor of Faith and Public Policy and Director of the Faiths and Civil Society Unit at Goldsmiths, but he is also head of the School of Culture and Society, I think, is that right? Culture and Society at the University of London at Goldsmiths. So we're very glad, very pleased indeed that you're willing to come and spend some time with us. Is there anything else that I should be saying about you, Adam, before we get on to me asking you some questions that I haven't mentioned already?
That's not for me to say, Jem. I'll leave that up to people to Google and look up as they wish. But thank you for that nice introduction.
Well, I'm really thrilled that we're getting another in conversation together, but I don't want to say too much. We really do want to hear from you, but we've been able to overlap over many years. So this is a great opportunity for me to ask you some questions. And I've got 4 questions for you to consider. And the first, Adam, is does religion and belief inhibit or help the university? And does the university help or inhibit the religion and belief identities of its members?
A light question to start with, Jem. So I'll can I say, just before I get into an attempt at an answer, thanks so much for inviting me, and hello to colleagues and participants. And there's this, of course, this rather odd experience that we've all got used to across the globe, a common experience during COVID of sometimes, even often, doing things this way. And here I am in my gracious sitting room, able to speak to large numbers of delegates from across the world. So I'm really grateful to be able to participate, and I hope I'll be able to say something kind of useful and stimulating for the rest of the conference. Okay, so on your question then, well, I think I'm going to use your language, belief, non-belief and religion, because I think it's great, and I've got a bit more to say about that later on. But on belief, non-belief and religion, I think that these are highly inhibiting categories for universities, where they get sort of stuck in an agenda that was, for me, a decade ago. And Jem, you'll remember, and some others in the conference might, the religious literacy leadership in higher education program that we put together, about then, when which started off being conceived as a sort of a way of addressing the problem of extremism on university campuses. And you'll recall that our first kind of challenge to that was to reframe that away from a preoccupation with the ways in which belief, non-belief and religion are inhibiting, because they're about terrorism, and say, look, there's actually something much more engageable here. But where universities are still stuck in that kind of old way of thinking, and I'm afraid I think some, and parts of some, still are to some extent, then they get stuck in the lens on these categories being primarily prevention of violent extremism, then a concern about how do we reflect belief, non-belief and religions in our operations, around exam dates is obviously classic, the provision of food, prayer spaces, but these are seen as operational, kind of, we better do this because we're trying to mitigate a risk. and that frames the whole kind of thing in, I think, a very inhibiting, constraining kind of way, really rather legalistically. So that almost sets up the whole thing to be a problem, because it's about mitigation of risk. I also think there's a massive danger of inhibiting, and a common practice actually, of inhibiting belief, non-religion and non-belief and religion in universities by excluding them from curricula. And for me, that's the space in which that inhibition continues most starkly, actually. But I want to say, for me, that's part of the past. And there's a way of looking forward that moves beyond prevent to identity, beyond operations to curricula and to values and meaning. What are we here for? What kind of students do we want to bring in? What sort of graduates do we want to send out? What kind of research do we want to generate? And with what kind of impacts? And also, really crucially, to move away from, if universities can't do this, then who? To move away from this whole kind of legalistic risk framing to something that says, what is there to learn here? What can we learn? And that requires a whole kind of architecture of emotional safety, actually, which again is something that universities haven't necessarily been brilliant at bringing, but chaplaincies have a lot more. So that's how I'd begin to sort of unpack that question there, Jen.
Yeah, and I think that opportunity to move away from a risk-averse or risk-fearful and fear-based agenda about belief, no belief in religion, to something which captures some opportunity. It sounds so promising. I wonder whether one of the difficulties of recent times is this lack of literacy around belief, no belief in religion, which means people feel they've got a responsibility to pretend like they already know things that they don't really understand, and find it very difficult to speak into the situation. So they kind of walk away from it for the risk of saying the wrong thing. I think this affects other equality and diversity and inclusion agendas, but do you think this is an important factor that is mitigating against good progress?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is where chaplaincy has a potentially huge role to play, because of the connection between the emotional experience of that and the setting up of a kind of emotional safety and the sort of intellectual problems that collide there. Because I think you're right, not just on belief, non-belief and religion, but also right across the protected characteristics. And I would especially say on race and trans right now, and also anti-Semitism. These are seen as hot potatoes rather than live issues. I mean, they're both, but seeing them as hot potatoes makes people often too scared to go there. What's going to blow up in my face? So we won't go there at all. And I think the intersections actually between anti-Semitism, race, trans, and belief, non-belief of religion are particularly critical to face up to and engage with. Now, if we do that by saying, let's have all the right policies to keep us safe, and those policies are framed around, here's the complaint you can bring, here's the mediation you could have, then we're going to wait until conflict has happened before we get in there and do something about it. I think there's a much better thing to do, which is to get ahead of it and to say, let's talk about this, let's facilitate the conversation, which starts with growing a sense of safety, which can only be rooted in relationships and trust. And that's where I think the chaplaincy dimension is so key.